welcome, community builders. I'm your host Sharath. Thanks for tuning in to the Community Decoded podcast. Today, I have a guest who's the Yoda of support, I would call it, because he's been uh, involving himself in support communities for a while now, and I think 2013 is when he founded this thing called Support Driven. And welcome to the
So
show, Scott. Let's do it. Scott
awesome.
Tran,
Thank you for having me on the
how are you
show.
doing?
Support Driven actually started as a podcast in 2013, and then the community started in 2014.
Ooh,
Yeah,
wow! I didn't know that.
yeah.
That's a great way to I think open up. So Scott Tran is the founder of Support Driven, 10,000 plus community of professionals who are into support, customer support, you can community support, everything.
Yep,
And he's been, like I said, he's kind of the Yoda for this particular zone, which is very important in my opinion in a startup life. Product, sales, marketing, engineering, everything, like design. If
hmm
everything is as important, it is with support as well, which is that's where you build relationships with your customers, with your users, and you kind of uh, build a loyalty team for yourself. So
yeah.
that's why I want to bring Scott to the podcast today, and I'm very excited to dive a lot about the techniques he saw in his experience with this wide range of customer support professionals, and we'll talk about like support driven community as well, and couple of exciting conferences, the Expo Summit, everything. So
Great.
all right, let's get into it. So you said
hmm
it started as a podcast. That's so fascinating to me, Scott. So talk to me about like why did you do in the first place? Why did you build Support Driven in the first place?
So I started the Support Driven podcast because I was the first engineering hire at a small startup, which meant I also did support. Right. I could tell I wasn't very good at it, so I went to a meetup, and then I learned there was a local conference. So I went to that conference, met a lot of great people, and I just asked them if we could talk again in a few weeks, and I would publish it as a podcast. And so that's how Support Driven got started. And it was just for me, it was just a way to talk to interesting people about the things that they were doing, right? Because about all the interesting things that were happening in support teams, right? And it wasn't really about doing great support. It was just like, people experimenting with different ways of working, right? And different ways of approaching work. Um, and then eventually I had a interview with Mike Graffam, who was head of customer success at Yammer at the time. And
Hmm.
he was telling me this story about like, they were connecting their customers to each other so that they could help each other use
Right.
Yammer as a product. And then
Right.
eventually those customers started self-organizing into meetups and workshops and like breakfasts. And I thought that sounds amazing. There should be something like that for customer support. And so I started the support-driven Slack community in 2014 as a place for people to help each other. And thankfully that is still and thankfully that continues to be the heart of the community, right? It's people helping each other, whether that's in their work or with mentorship or getting a job or hiring or just all things related.
That's awesome. That's a very how do I put this? Like you kind of scratched your own itch, and here we are, 10 years. Oh my God,
Yeah,
that's ten
yeah,
years worth of like effort, time,
yes,
work,
yeah,
people, a lot of money, I assume, and
hmm
everything went into that one curiosity you found. Like, what if, like, there
yes,
exists like a community for supporter? And that's amazing. That, I think, to me is a biggest, I feel, inspiration for folks who are listening. Guys, you have to scratch your own curiosity. You never know where you will end up. The fundamental thing you can do right now as we speak and you listen is that really ask these questions. What if this exists, where you are really kind of want to learn, like, so all those ideas, the little thoughts can convert into, like, communities. Like 10,000 plus people is no joke, right? And you've done this when, right now, let me actually paint a picture for folks who are building communities right now these days. Slack is like a default option. It's
Right.
like,
Right.
right. So you've done that prior to this whole movement of like communities and all that. So
Yeah.
talk to me about that decision, or why
Hmm.
did you actually made you made that move,
Yeah.
instead of you saying that, what, let's do like an email newsletter or whatever the other path
Yep.
right now people are choosing.
Yeah. A lot of it's because I enjoy chat and chat communities, right? So I knew that's what I wanted to
Right.
build. I didn't want to build a forum, right? I didn't want to build like a group email list or whatnot. And frankly, I chose Slack at the time because it was the only one that I could build a community on for free, right? Because everything else at the time, I was
Hmm.
charging per user, right? And that just doesn't make sense if you're trying to build a free community.
Right.
Yeah, and it worked out because what really worked out for us, especially in the beginning, was uh, because so many technology companies were also starting to like adopt Slack, right? That it made it very easy if you worked at a tech company, right, to just add support driven as another tab in your Slack app, right, versus having to like go somewhere else or install some other software. And I think that's probably continues to be true today.
That's so fascinating. Again, you kind of went with your own gut, like, what do I enjoy,
Hmm.
right? Like, I do
Hmm.
enjoy, I think, forums at that time were very popular.
Yes. Yes.
In the rise of probably
Hmm.
Reddit and
Yep.
Hacker News is still like very popular these days, but
Yep.
that's very fascinating. Talk to me about, I feel, again, I want to compare your 10 years,
Hmm.
like the year one, month one, kind of that experience to current community building
Yeah.
techniques, right? Like
Yeah.
right now, for example, if anybody starts a community, they have these platforms like Twitter or like any other
Hmm.
thing, like where you can announce
Hmm.
it, sign up,
Hmm.
you do like a bunch of distribution. How did you ended up attracting support professionals back in 2014? This
Yeah.
is like, what kind of do things that don't scale methods like you did to bring people
It
together?
was very slow, right? So when I first started Support Driven, it was just me and one other person from the UK. Uh, Essentially, it was the two of us just hanging out and asking each other, "Hey, how's your day going? Right? Have you seen this article? What do you think about it?" Right? For
Right.
essentially for 6 weeks, right? And then a couple more people
Wow.
showed up, right? And then a couple more, and it took us 6 months to like reach 100 people. And that's because
Oh my.
we've only ever grown through word of mouth. We've never done any promotional stuff or ads or anything to like, you know, really try to like drive people into the community. And I think that has actually worked in our favor because as we've gotten bigger, that has snowballed and we get, you know, probably 100 people, well, certainly much quicker than 6 months nowadays. Right. Um,
Right. Of course. Yeah.
yeah. And so that worked out really well for us. And even now, right, trying to grow the size of the community is continues to not be a focus, right? Because I remember early on, people would ask like, "Oh, so what are your plans? How big do you want the community to grow?" And that's never been. I've never been concerned about that, right? Because it's so much about the relationships and are people getting value, right? Are they, do they want to be in the community? Are they making meaningful relationships? Are they getting meaningful help? Right? And that is and essentially that's how we grow, right? Because if we're doing those things, right, then
Hmm.
so I would say it comes back to, are we doing things that are worth talking about, right? Because if we are and people talk about us, then that's how we grow.
That's that's so, I feel like, uh, that's so intangible,
Hmm.
I would say.
Hmm.
It's because, um, right now the trend is let's grow
Hmm.
fast, let's bring as many people as we
Sure.
can. Of course, I mean, founders, they worry about
Mm-hmm.
relationships,
Mm-hmm.
quality, of course, 100%. They sometimes they gate it, the community and whatnot. But it's so like good to hear that your intention
Mm-hmm.
is to not grow. Your intention is to, like,
Yeah.
bring right set of people together
Mm-hmm.
and do things in the right way, so that will actually snowball and like
Yeah.
bring more, bring more people. So I feel one of the things I want to kind of unpack is that, when did you actually fall in love with the community?
Mm-hmm.
The moment you went to these meetups, you saw the power, okay, you know what, this is what I want to pursue? Or because you started with one person,
Yeah.
so talk to me about that whole 6 month,
Yeah. It was just
and when did you see that it is an opportunity?
yeah. Um, it was one person, right, and then a few more people showed up, and then a few more, right, and I think people started telling each other about the community, so more people started showing up, right, and I think the community feels different at different sizes, right? So when you're first starting out and it's really small, it feels very different. It certainly feels different than it does now with like 10,000 plus people that have joined,
Mm,
right? And and that was a challenging, right? To realize, oh wait, this is picking up steam. This is more than just like a small group of friendly people hanging out, right? Because in there, like I was saying, like in the 50 to 100 person range, everybody knew everybody, like on a very first name basis,
personal basis.
right? Um,
Right.
but then as we started growing, right, we were going to lose that. And so one of my concerns as we were growing is like, are we going to lose what makes us special, right? Like what makes
Mm,
support driven, right? Um, and so far, we've been able to hold on to that, right? Where, the focus of the community continues to be helping each other. And like and that's what brings in people. And if that's something that they want to be a part of, right, then they very naturally kind of click and fit in. If they're not interested in that, then, that's okay too, right? Because I think it's important to recognize, like, you can't be everything to everybody, right?
mm,
Um, and that's okay, right? And so,
absolutely.
um, and yeah, and so who knows? Maybe at 20,000, 30,000, 50,000, we'll have to make some other changes or whatnot to kind of maintain the culture. But like that's what I'm hoping to do is like no matter what size we are, right? That is still what brings people together. That's still how they're participating in the community. Um,
Mm.
And then for me, especially in the early days, it was just like, oh, this is fun. I'm hanging out with people. These people are cool, right? And it didn't, because like this was just a Slack community, right? Like there was no blueprint or no examples of like how do you build a business around this, right?
Right.
And so I was wondering like, well, where does this go and how does this work, right? Um, and then back in 2015, several community members asked if Support Driven could host a conference, and
Mm. Oh, wow.
if because in customer support there's not a lot of conferences, right? I think it's very underserved as an industry, given the number of people in it, given
Right.
just the number of like resources that are put into it. Um,
Right.
so first I said no because when someone asks you to host a conference, like they're asking you to throw a party and they may or may not show up, right?
Mm.
Um, but I knew we had people in our community who had experience, right? And so since this question kept coming up, I asked them, well, how do you do it? Like, what do you, how do you approach it, right? And luckily the community came together and supported the idea, and so we were essentially donated the venue for the first conference, which was huge because that's the single biggest cost. Automatic used to have a
Wow.
space in San Francisco, and they're like, yeah, you can use it for the conference. Um,
Nice.
and so then we did a Kickstarter for it, right? And we asked for 10K in the Kickstarter, and we hit that goal in the first day. Um,
Wow.
and we ended the Kickstarter with 53K, right? Which, yeah, so that was kind of the, I'll say that was the turning point, right? Where I saw like, okay, now there's, there's demand for a conference like what we were putting together, right? And
Right.
so after we did the first conference, I talked to a lot of people in the community. I wrote a blog post and said like, I want to, I want to put more time into support driven, and the only way I could see doing that is if I could figure out how to turn it into a job, right? And so since 2016, when we actually held the first conference, I've been working on support driven full time.
Wow. That was actually my follow-up
Yeah,
question, which is 2014, you
yeah,
still had a job
yeah,
and you were kind of
yeah.
doing
This was
this
just
in
like
the
a little like hobby,
right,
side thing, right? Yeah.
right. And the monetization
Hmm.
piece, when is that the conference is the like the first
Yep.
like
Yep. The conference
way to
was
make
kind of like the
money in the
first,
wow. So
way for us for support driven to make money for me to enable me to work on it full time.
wow, that's awesome. And
Hmm.
talk to me about uh, the 10 years,
Hmm.
the zero to you, Scott, and the other UK
Hmm.
guy,
Hmm.
like where you are right now, the 10K plus people. Did the growth happen steadily,
Hmm.
slowly, or did you see like a spike? You know what?
Yeah, it was
The
very
conference.
steady, right? In a slow way, right? But it's a lot like a snowball moving downhill, right? Because so let's say with 100 people, right, and they're telling other people about it, right? Then we get a trickle, right? But when we've got like 1,000 people, right, then that trickle becomes like a stream, right? Um,
Hmm.
and so so it's gone. So now we get a lot of I think probably get 100 people like maybe in like 2 weeks or so, right? Because so it's still very well. It's always been like word of mouth driven, and then the other interesting thing about how we grow is that anytime we do a conference, we grow because there's always people who
Hmm.
come looking for a conference first, right? And then they discover like, oh, this conference is hosted by a community. Let me check that out, right? Um,
Right. What?
go,
Yeah.
yeah,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
and the other interesting thing is when other people do conferences in our space, we grow, right? Because our community members go to those, right? And then they are like meeting people and telling people about support driven. And so, so we get a little bump every time there's a conference, whether we host it or somebody else hosts
Uh,
it.
That's a good strategy. Uh,
Hmm.
so one quick question before we move
Hmm.
on to the actual like
Hmm.
full support. So you've been doing this for almost like 10
Hmm.
years, right? And
Hmm.
you seem to be a person where you do this steadily with with composure
Hmm.
and like intention.
Hmm.
In the beginning, 2014, 2015, what did you do that made that 100 to bring another 100? Like what are some initiatives that you did, or in Slack, or
Hmm.
like events, or I don't know,
Yeah,
what were your uh, the first 6 months to 1 year, what did you do?
I talk to people,
The word of mouth.
right?
That's
I
it.
talk to people. They when they have questions, right? Even if I didn't even have the answer, I would still talk to them, right? And so, like, I think it's helpful, right? And this is one of the reasons why I like chat, right? Is to never feel like when you ask a question that you still always feel heard, right? Even if I don't have an answer for you, I can still talk to you, right? I could, maybe I can connect you to somebody I know that might have the answer, right?
Hmm.
Um, because the key thing in our community is people come because they have questions or they
Hmm.
have some kind of request, right? But they stay because that's where they are connecting with friends, right? Because they make friendships, right? Or they stay because we end up becoming like a place where people who used to work together, right? Like they're this is the common space that they still have together, right? Like over time,
Hmm.
and so it's and that's true for us today. So um, we encourage, right? We support. We want people to like connect, not just on a professional level, but also on a personal level. So in our community, we also have channels for like personal interests, right, and personal, um, and different locations, right? So the people who are, um, like in San Francisco or Portland or Berlin or whatnot, can
Hmm.
all like have a space to like connect together. Um,
Hmm.
and I would say this is not true today, but in the beginning, right, we only had one channel and that was it, right?
That's
That was
it.
it. There was one channel. Like, well, when you only have 10 people, why do you need more than one channel, right? Even at 100
Well.
people, like I think around 100 we added a job board channel just because people were posting jobs, so they just wanted another place for that,
Oh.
right? I think maybe it was around 100 or 150. We added another channel for like this specific platform that people were using because they were talking about it so much, and the people who were not on the platform were annoyed about it, right?
Wait. This
Hmm.
is very interesting. Wait. This is amazing. So, do you think it's a good strategy to actually have one channel so that people will be forced to actually talk in that channel?
It's not that they're forced, but think about it this way, right? Like, let's say if you're hosting um, a house party, right?
Hmm.
And you have 10 people show up, right? Do you want to tell them like, hey, there's 10 other rooms, go check those out, or this is where the party's at? It's in this one room. Where we're going to hang out in this one room, right? And even at 100
Man,
people,
that's
right? Like, because and that's what got people to like really connect and know each other on a first name basis because you saw them, right? Because there's only one place, there's only one room in the house party. Now things have changed, right? We're well past having just one channel for things, but I would say that was essential in the beginning, right? It's just it increases the chances of people seeing and talking to each other.
that's really good. That's a great tip. I feel instead of really, like you said, opening up the whole
Hmm.
house, we'll all sit in the living
Yep,
room.
yep.
People
This is where
will
the
just
party's
come
at.
out. This is the party, and that's it. You come join
Hmm.
us week over week. And I feel in a way, if everybody's talking in one channel,
Hmm.
everybody knows everybody
Hmm.
in one way
Yeah,
or the other. If you think about it,
yeah, yep.
that actually is the most important thing in the
Hmm.
beginning,
Yeah.
right? Like I said, I feel if we see signals like people are posting more jobs,
Hmm.
that makes sense.
Hmm.
Now there is a more chance for people to actually interact in two rooms
Yep.
because that came from the people. So I love that. I absolutely love that. That's, I think, probably
Hmm.
one of the good
Yeah.
tips people can take
Yeah.
away from this podcast. Uh, yeah,
I
go
have
ahead.
I
You
have
were going to say something.
another tip now that we're talking about the early days um, of support driven. The other key thing, and which also continues to be true today, right, is I'm always so all through support driven's history, right? It's never been part of like a roadmap or a plan, right? It's always been about listening to the community and then how do we, you know, uh, how do we serve that need, right? Or if we can't serve that need, how do we do that? And then,
Hmm.
and just as importantly, right, how do we do it with the community and not just for the community, right? So, like the way that we organize our conferences, right? The way that we do our job board and the way that we do, we run a mentorship program. All of that is done with the community.
Hmm. I love that. I'm just noting it down. I feel another great point. It shouldn't be for the community, even though it's
Hmm.
enticing. You get a lot of ideas about like what you
Hmm.
want to do. It's always with the
Yes.
community,
Yes.
meaning you said really like understand
Hmm.
what they want. If they really want to talk about jobs,
Hmm.
that's it.
Right.
That's the roadmap.
Right.
Do the facilitate how people are talking about one
Hmm.
particular topic in the best way possible.
Right. Right. Um,
That's the end of the path.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that makes a huge difference because it's it. So there are a couple of things. A, I think you end up in a better destination, right, when you do it together. It's also more fun to do things, with the community, and it's yeah, and so that's how we approach it. So, for example, like with our job board, right, a lot of it is community members sharing jobs or sharing jobs that they come across, right? Whether they're hiring or they're looking, and then they just share the jobs that they find, right? But that's how our job board runs, right? Our conferences, right? Um, we set up this talk editor program so that when someone comes to speak, because we recruit from our community for our speakers, right? And a lot of them have, they're experts in what they do, but they're usually not experts in public speaking, right? And so we connect them with another community member to give them feedback, right? To help them polish their presentation, and that you know um, has worked out really great for us.
That's right. I think let's talk about the whole conference
Mm-hmm.
gig,
Mm-hmm.
like how to host,
Mm-hmm.
how to like go from scratch, how
Yeah.
to successfully do it every year. We'll talk. We'll cover the topic
Mm-hmm.
later, but I want to take a deep dive into your insights on community support
Mm-hmm.
or just customer support in
Mm-hmm.
general.
Okay.
Support, community support,
Mm-hmm.
tomato,
Yeah.
tomato, all the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, in your experience, what are some best methods that you saw, like the support professionals being on their peak,
Mm-hmm.
like being very effective in delivering the results for their startups or companies that you want to share with us today?
Now, are we talking about the people that are doing support, or providing support through, you know, like a support community, right? Like where people are getting support through community.
You basically, let's talk about like support, people who work under support department, for example customer support, uh, because I think these days, founders
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally, early stage
Mm-hmm.
founders, they do everything,
Right.
right? And they flip the hat.
Right.
So probably this will help. And also at the same time, right now, community managers are customer support reps too, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so everything you tell to us, like,
Mm-hmm.
everything you kind of like spare us right now is all like part of the whole group. So you go, like, whatever the thing that you feel is the best for people to listen. Yeah, let's do it.
Hello. I think we may be frozen.
No, wait, I'm here. You go ahead, Scott.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I can just talk, right? So, you know, we get a lot of early stage, startups and people working in customer support in our community. And I think the key thing, especially in the early days, is to do the support, but also work with to kind of be strategic and kind of look at the company as a whole, right? And not just not just looking at closing tickets, but also as you're hearing things in support, bring that back to product, right? Or bringing that back to engineering, right? Because I think support is where customers come to get value for what they paid for, right? And the things that you hear and the things that you're seeing and the issues that you're running across in support are just another aspect of the product, right? And so from a from an early stage startup, right, like you have that, right? And what I've seen in with interviews with founders, right, is that they in the early days when they're doing it, they have that and they incorporate that back into the product, right? And then eventually they bring on a support person, so now they're not as connected to it, and a lot of them miss it, right? So kind of, I think the opportunity for support is to continue to bring that back, to the rest of the company, right? Because the biggest advantage a startup has is its flexibility. It's being nimble, right, and being able to like adapt and listen and make changes compared to like a really large competitor, right? So um,
Hmm.
that's key, right? And I think one the benefit of joining, of being in a community or being connected to people that are doing what you're doing is that you can learn from them, right? You can learn from their experience, you can learn from their mistakes, right? And you can also help other people who may be at an earlier stage, um, than you. So yeah, so I think that those are the you know key things about if you're doing
Hmm.
support at a early stage startup.
Cool. Let's switch gears a little bit, Scott, and I want to understand your philosophy behind. I think you've told me this prior to the recording as well, where while we were like chatting offline. You seem to have this philosophy of
Hmm.
building a community first, and then focus on building a business next. So elaborate it. Talk to me about it. How did you come to that conclusion from your experience, if you can share?
Sure. It, it, I came to it because that's how we started, right? The community came first, and then
Hmm.
we did the first conference. And, I had no experience in organizing conferences, so I did a lot of research. And what I learned at the time was there are primarily two types of conferences, or at least there are two common types of conferences. One is it's just a marketing exercise, right? So like,
Right.
and the other is you know it's a it's a business, but most conferences that are run as a business tend to cater to sponsors because they write bigger checks.
Right.
And so as we were planning our first conference, that didn't make sense to me, right? It's the
Mm.
community that's asking for the conference,
Right.
right? And it didn't make sense to like say, "Oh, great, you can have a conference, but it's gonna suck because it's gonna be for the sponsors."
Mm.
Um, and so we didn't even plan to have sponsorships at the first conference, but we had people asking for us, and we just made up something on the
Mm.
spot, right?
Mm.
And and so for us, it's always been the community first. It's been the community is the heart of everything, and I think
Mm.
that is true.
Mm.
It's also been true on the conference side of things, where we start with the attendee experience and what we want to create for attendees, and then we figure out how do we add sponsors into that. Um,
Mm.
and it's true because if you're bringing the community together, you bring attendees together, then the sponsors will show up, right? And so
Mm.
we didn't need to cater to the sponsors because uh, we had the community. Um, Now, granted, we still have to like work with them and give them, a valuable like sponsorship experience, right? But
Mm.
not at the expense of the community.
Mm. And uh, are there any sacrifices you made along through that journey? Like, it's always not that hard to it's
Yeah,
always hard.
well,
It's
it.
always hard to like build like a business,
Hmm.
because community can be like passion, and it takes time,
Yeah,
like you said in the
yeah.
previously, right? So any
I
hardships?
mean, I think we probably would have sold more sponsorships, right, if we had made sponsors the priority. Um, and we certainly did lose some sponsors because they thought we were like every other conference out there and kind of prioritized them. And when we told them that we didn't, they were not interested. And so there's some cost to it, right? But I think but you have to. I think it's helpful to understand like where does the value come from, right,
Mm,
and what is important, and not just you know trying to make a deal in the moment or
mm.
trying to make money in the moment,
And
right?
talk to me about the role of support in community building. What is the strategic role it plays? That's one of the things that you are very, I mean, support driven is kind of very good at, like,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. So for us, our community is about helping each other, so supporting each other, right? That's the heart of it,
mm,
um, and that's how. And I always look to that to know if we're on track or not, right? And and that's what brings people in, and that's I think that's what's special about the community because I don't know that I could have built a similar community in any other space, right? Um,
mm,
because I think we our community is full of people that do customer support who help other people as their job, right? And I think that has been such a big factor in in the direction that we've gone and just the things we've been able to do. Um, and and I think it's a big part of the value that community members get from being in our community because if you're the head customer support person at your company, then who do you go to in your company for ideas and to about because if you're at the top, right, then there is nobody else, right? Your
mm,
boss probably doesn't know customer support as well as you do, and so that's kind of a big part of where our a big job for people to join our community is to find that support network
mm,
to help them in their jobs, help them in their career.
mm. And talk to me about the community support as a strategy in general. Why do you think
Hmm.
startups, founders, or even like big brands, they should invest in doing a good community support or customer support, whatever you want to call?
Yeah, I think it's similar to okay, so the origin story of support driven came from a interview I had done on the support driven podcast with Mike Graffam, who was head of customer success at Yammer at the time, and the reason that they connected customers to each other was um, Yammer is like a social network for companies, right? And so they couldn't hire a CSM for every person because when they signed on a customer, right, then you're talking about like 500 people, 1,000 people, like all the people in the company, right?
Mm,
Um, and and so they connected their customers to each other to help them understand how to get value from Yammer. So if you were like in fintech, right, they would connect you to another fintech company, right? And I
mm,
think that's there's from a community support perspective, right? I think that's where you can there's an opportunity for companies that have um, because people do get attached to companies, right? So by creating a
mm,
community around it and helping them help each other, right?
mm,
You're growing, you're nurturing advocates for your company as well as helping new customers and other customers succeed with your product, right?
mm,
And one of the things that's been really amazing about having the community, right, is that they're always talking about things that they are, that they love, things that they don't like, right, things that they wish existed, right. So from a company perspective, right, like that is, there's so much to learn there, right. It's so much easier to do research, right. So much easier to get feedback than
mm,
if you don't have that community, if you don't have that access, because now you're sending emails and surveys trying to get people to tell you when if you have that community they're talking about it all the time, right. And
mm,
so I think it makes there's so many benefits for companies to have a community. But I think what's hard for companies is how to understand how it fits in, right? Because if you only look through the lens of like sales and transactions, then um, it doesn't fit neatly into that, right? But relationships don't fit fit neatly
mm,
into
mm,
into transactions, right? Like you don't judge your personal relationships based on like transactions. Hopefully.
right. Mm. You've been in this zone. I mean, I
Hmm.
would say the niche for more
Hmm.
than kind of like 10 years now.
It's 9,
Uh,
right? But it's getting close. It's getting close to 10.
Getting close, getting close. I would still count the 2013 of your
Yeah.
experience. The Slack.
Yeah.
So let's call it 10 years.
Okay. All right.
Uh, but so the thing I wanna uh, wanna kind of like understand, what are some companies that come to your mind when you think about great customer support or community support, and why do you think
Hmm.
they're doing a good job?
Um, I think WordPress does a good job around their community because they're open source, right? So they've got that built-in uh, base, right? And they have a lot of people contributing to it, and so you know, and I think they do a good job of growing their ecosystem because I think that's the opportunity and the evolution, right,
Hmm.
of a community is to grow into an ecosystem because that's what
Hmm.
we built around support driven.
Hmm.
Because it's not just people in customer support, but it's also the vendors. It's also people who are looking for their first jobs, right?
Hmm.
And and I think so. Companies that have that and take care of that ecosystem, right,
Hmm.
do do it well. So like and I think there's a lot of platform companies that do that well because they see it as an ecosystem. So for example, like Salesforce has is an
Right.
ecosystem, right?
Right.
And I think um, they do a good job of and also like in other companies, right, that have a platform model that are doing it well are good examples of
Hmm.
maybe you could call it like an evolved community, right?
Right.
Because it's not just bringing people together, but now they're there because they're growing together, they're doing business together, right? They're
Right.
supporting each other and all this like other like related stuff that happens.
Hmm.
um yeah,
And
yeah.
in your
Hmm.
experience, what are some different ways you saw people doing support? Any particular specific examples or company names that, hey, they do a different job like
Y-
regular
so,
support?
so something that has happened maybe in the past year and a half, 2 years, is companies are providing support on Slack, right?
Hmm. True.
Which is relatively new. And I remember there was a lot of resistance to it in the beginning when people were starting to do it. And of course, people were like, well, it's not a support tool. We shouldn't be doing support in there.
Hmm. Hmm.
But ultimately, right, you support people where they are, right? And
Hmm.
if Slack is where they are, right, then that's going to be more effective than trying to make them like come to you.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so I'm really excited about that because that connects you know, so the support piece, but it's also an opportunity to build community as well, right? Because
Hmm.
if you already
Hmm.
have all these people that are in the same space, right, then you can build community.
Right. And talk to me about like any tips for you. I love that. First of all, I think that's a new trend for sure. Even we at
Yes,
Credo,
yes.
we do like this private Slack channels
Hmm.
with our customers where we are
Yep.
like on top of them every day. They need anything, we like hop on, and that's the best way
Hmm.
to even get in
Yeah,
touch with them.
yeah. It's
uh,
so much better than email.
exactly, right? Like, we're live. We're
Yeah.
doing this async and we're live, and we know like who's online and offline and all that.
Yep.
Uh, uh, so when you go through these changes in support, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
What kind of thinking that develops in your mind that you try to educate your community at support driven? Like any, I wouldn't say innovative ideas, but
Hmm.
anything that you see as an opportunity, just like how people are doing on Slack, you
Yeah.
find it like, yo, you know what? There can be opportunity where we can do a better job, or like adapt that model whatsoever.
Yeah. I think I don't necessarily do anything specifically around that because I think people see and learn from each other, right?
Hmm.
Because, like, for example, someone is talking about like how they are providing support to someone else on Slack, right? Then other people will see that, and so it's just kind of, the way I think of running support driven, it's almost, so I have several mental models I use, right? And one of them
Mm.
is it's like being the cafe owner, right? Like you're hosting the space and you're making rules so that people don't like beat each other up, right, in your
Mm.
space, right? But they're doing the talking, right? And the ideas that kind of gain traction, right, do so organically, right? And so
Mm.
so Slack kind of becoming a support channel, right, was not
Mm.
something that Slack itself ever planned for,
Would have
and I don't
imagined,
I, I don't
yeah.
think that necessarily they even recognize it to this day, right?
Right.
Um, but it is something that it's picking up momentum, right? Because either people are getting support through Slack, and then they're like, hey, this works really well. We should like also do this, right?
Mm.
Um, or they hear about other people doing it, and then they start trying it out, right? And I think it's also came about specifically on the Slack side, right? Um, because if you're like a new young tech company, you're already using Slack, right? Then that is also easier for you, right? To communicate and support your customers than to like spin up some other platform and like remember to check in on that platform. Um, but so that's one side of it, right? The other thing that I try to do with our conferences and the content that we're creating and the online events that we're creating is to see what questions people are asking, where the interest is, and giving those topics a stage, right? So whether that's through an online event or a talk at a conference,
Right.
um, but I think it really all starts with listening and then supporting.
Right. And I think this is a good segue for my next question, which is, in your opinion, what are some best qualities uh, anybody who's involved in support should have? Like they can be founders, they can be like anybody. So I'm not
Hmm.
generally talking
Yeah.
about support professionals, but everybody should do like support, in my opinion, right? Like
Hmm.
every team member
Hmm.
should be like willing to do
Yeah.
product engineering, because they'll build a good relationship with their customers, right, or the
Hmm.
community. So
Hmm.
what kind of qualities that you recommend people should either develop or hone in when they want
Well,
to do like great support?
I think listening is the first um, skill, right? First quality.
Mm.
I think it's also great for founders and really great for a lot of people, right? But it is essential in
Right.
support, right? It's listening and communicating back, right, and helping people feel heard, right? And and I think those are skills, right? Like where people can get better at those things, but those are essential. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that's what, yeah. So I would say those are the essential skills. Um, and the other pieces I think are can be learned, and I think an essential skill for everybody right now is learning, adapting to change, right? Being
Hmm.
resilient, learning new technologies. Because I mean, look at how you're recording this podcast, right? This was not possible 10 years ago, right? I was using GarageBand and chopping up like wave files, manually.
Right. Yeah, man. Thanks for dropping GarageBand. It's a good, nostalgic memories. Uh, let's talk about the other piece, which is what qualities should people avoid when they're doing or when they want to excel at support.
um, I don't know about avoiding, right? Because I think people can still be themselves, right? Like, um,
Mm,
and I think if you start with listening, right,
mm,
um, then you can. So I'm a fan of people being authentic, being themselves, and not trying to make everybody talk the same way or respond the
mm,
same way as if like everybody's just a copy of everybody else, because
right.
that's just not how people are,
Mm,
right? Um, and so I'm a big so yeah so I don't think that there's anything that people you know like have to avoid to be in support.
mm. I like that. Yeah, authenticity is everything. I feel, it's hard,
I
but it's kind of like a necessity.
I think it's hard. It's becoming more rare, right? Because
Mm,
of the drive to kind of like standardize, right? And especially from big companies, right? Like, and
right.
everybody to like sound and like be the same,
Mm,
And so I think we get a lot less of it.
mm. And let's switch gears a little bit and talk about conferences. You've been kind of
Mm-hmm.
hosting two, well, not one,
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
Support Driven Expo and the
Yep.
Leadership Summit. Talk
Yeah.
to me about it, and if, in your opinion, if you can
Mm-hmm.
share some tips about how to host even a
Mm-hmm.
conference in the first place. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about like the basics of hosting a
Yeah.
conference, like the logistics piece, or what should people focus on, community builders specifically, and we can, like,
Yeah.
go from there.
I think especially with community, there's so much opportunity to create magic, right?
Mm,
When you have conferences, because you have the opportunity to bring your community together in person and engage in person. I mean, with online communities, right?
mm,
Um, and that's so you have that opportunity, right? I think you know um, for I would say for me, right? I focus when I'm thinking about a conference. I focus on what are people going to remember 2 weeks, 2 months after the conference is over,
mm,
right? And that's where I want to put the energy and the time and like how can we facilitate or create opportunities for those memories to happen at the conference.
mm,
Um, and I think so much of what people remember at the conferences are the people that they meet, the conversations that they have,
mm,
right? And so for at our conference, right, that is a big part of what we try to design into how the conference works.
mm,
Um, and our conferences are for professional, right? And so like there's the learning, there's the talks, right? And so like and so we do also focus on how to we help our speakers
mm,
um, share their knowledge, right? And so that's why we have talk editors, right? Because most of our speakers are professionals, right? They're not, or they're professionals in what they do, right? So
mm,
the professionals in support,
mm,
um, but they're not. The majority of them are not professional public speakers,
mm.
right? And so so we help them there, right? And then
Interesting.
um, yeah, and I think for and this is also just as much personal, right? Like our conferences are always a little bit different from event to event, right? So it's not like we did one conference that worked and then we just, you know, do the exact same thing every time. Um, but
Hmm.
that's also, I think, for me, because I like to experiment and try to create new and,
Hmm.
try to improve things, right?
Interesting. Hmm.
Um, all the time. And so that's a lot of the fun of it, right? Of, how can we make this a little bit better next time?
Hmm.
Um, and so and it really starts with kind of like, what is the goal of the conference, right? So having, and who's it for?
Right.
Um, so that's why we do two conferences, right? So we have our leadership summit, which is, primarily for leaders in customer support, senior leaders in customer support, and this, I think it was this year, right? For the first time, we had people apply to attend, right? So we had never done that before, because what we had heard from our the senior leaders in our community was that they liked to go to the conferences, and they really wanted to meet other senior leaders. And previously, that conference was kind of just more of a, if you're interested in management, right, we're gonna like have a lot of content there, and so you'd get people who were first-time managers and people who were interested in becoming managers as well as senior leaders, and so
Hmm.
um, and so we're always listening to the community and kind of adapting what we're doing, right? Um, and so we have this other kind of conference that we started, which was around like how to a place for the entire support team to come, right? Because you have your support organization, and and there's conferences for the leaders of your organization, but like, what about the people who are doing the work, or the people who are responsible for certain areas, right, of your support organization?
Right.
And so we created Expo as that conference. So that one has a different focus. It has multiple tracks, right? So most support teams have a knowledge base, right? So who's in charge of that? Well, we've got a track for them, right?
Hmm.
Most teams, as they get bigger, start having a person who's in charge of like operations and scheduling, and so we have a track for them, right? We also have a management track there, so like for all the frontline managers and kind of the um, early to like, or beginning to like mid-level managers. So we have a track for them as well, right? And so yeah, and
Right.
so and I think that the expo is, as far as I'm aware of, the only conference that really kind of tries to um, is the only conference that tries to kind of create a space to learn across the entire department uh, in the industry, right? Because every other conference that I've seen out there is like leadership focused.
Hmm. It's not like it involves everybody, right? Like it's kind of like a, like you said, in the earlier, community building is like hosting a party.
Hmm.
So you don't need to
It
like,
is. Yeah.
and you definitely will have like a VIP section somewhere, but it shouldn't only say VIPs only, right? Like the party shouldn't say, it should be like everybody who's into the,
Well,
into the idea are
the
welcome.
yeah,
So
I mean, the reason that we
uh,
created Expo is
that's good.
is
That's like something that involves community from grassroots. And
yeah,
talk to me
because
about the
hmm
whole sponsorships, right? Like how do you approach, is there any tactical advice that you can give us about, like, approaching sponsors and getting them converted, like.
so the thing that we didn't realize at the time, but has made our sponsorships easy, was by letting vendors join our community, right?
Hmm.
Because they could join our community, they were in there kind of, you know, getting excited about the conferences
Mm,
as along with everybody else,
mm,
right? And so for us, we have never done anything outbound when it comes to sponsorships, right? Like
mm.
you'll
Okay.
we've never sent an email or a LinkedIn message asking somebody to sponsor, right?
Right.
Um, and so because they're a part of the community, part of the ecosystem, right? They
Mm,
they reach out to us to ask like, how can we work with you? How can we sponsor with you, right? And so if you're running a community, if you're planning to like, if you want to start a business around it, like let them in, right? And then give them rules so that they are like contributing to the community, but that will make
mm,
the sponsorships easy.
mm. Yeah, I think it's that's the sign for you as well, that you have built like a strong community. Then if you're not doing outbound, that's a
Hmm.
phenomenal. I feel like that's a phenomenal job. Before we wrap things up, I want to ask like this question: what
Hmm.
is your strategy at Support Driven to support the community? What is your support strategy, if you want to share? How is that
Um,
look like?
mhm. Yeah, I think it's, we're listening, and it's, so one, I would say it's evolving. It continues to evolve,
Hmm.
right? Um, and I would also say it also comes back to listening, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And um, and seeing what the community wants. But the tricky thing about listening to a community, right, is you can't just take what people say and then go and do it, right? It's a bit
Right.
like if you have, just imagine if you have kids, or if, or as a parent, right?
Hmm.
Um, you can't just take what one of your kids says, like, I want to do this, and then just go off and do it, right? Like you've got to like, you know
Hmm.
consider like
Think through.
the whole family, right?
Hmm.
um, and and so for us, the thing that we're working on next is how do we create the structures, to create the model, uh, to have the community more involved in supporting the community, right?
Hmm.
So an example of this is around moderation, right? So far, right, we have a model where like generally I or someone else on the team has handled all moderation issues.
Moderation. Right.
Um, but as we're getting bigger, that is not working as, like that's, we need a change, right? And so
Hmm.
we're looking at ways to recruit and support community moderation,
Hmm.
community moderators, and yeah, yeah, and I think that's the thing. And then I think the other thing that I look at to know if we're on the right track, right, is looking to see if people, or are people inviting other people into support driven. So that's kind of the, I don't have a great way to measure this because it's a little bit messy, right? Um, but if that's not happening, then I know we're in trouble, right?
Right.
That we're clearly need to like course correct,
Hmm.
um, you know, because that is the way that we grow, right? And if we're, you know, um, if we're not doing things that lead people to like recommend us, then
Hmm.
yeah, then I would say we're in trouble.
Hmm. Amazing. And I think you, like you said, it's true. Word of mouth is hard to quantify,
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
but as long as, like you said, you're doing great support and people are
Hmm.
recommending your community to others, I feel like, that's a great signal.
So, so yeah, I want to touch on that, right? Because I think, you know, I think generally, right, we tend to focus on things that are easy to measure,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? at the detriment of, and I think when we do that, we lose sight of things that are valuable,
Right. Right.
right? And so I think it's important to keep in mind what's valuable, even if it's
Mm.
hard to measure.
Mm. That's a great advice. That's a great advice for community builders. It's easy to like kind of do things that are visible because
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
progress and results will come back.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Because
yeah,
for example, we have never sat around and thought about how do we get more engagement,
right.
right? How do we get people to do more reactions or whatnot? Because that's not where the value really
Is
is for anybody,
yeah.
right?
No,
The value is in like, the conversations and the answers to the questions that people get and the relationships
right,
that people build in your community.
right. I love that. I think yeah, that's a great advice for basically do the hard thing. That's why it's a hard
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
Nobody does it.
Hmm.
Nobody actually like takes a stab at it, right? So I love that advice. I think on that high note we can wrap it up.
Hmm.
But
All right,
any
sounds good.
any closing thoughts, Scott? Do you want to share with our listeners?
I would love to see more communities start businesses,
Mm,
right? And really take care of their communities and grow their communities from that lens. Because I think there's so much potential out there,
right,
right? Like, um, and I think that's an opportunity that community builders have, right? And I would love for them to take that chance,
right,
because like, what if we had a whole category of like
right,
businesses, right, that are community first,
right.
right? I think the people would love it more,
Mm,
right?
mm-hmm,
Like people would love to be in a community that is exists for the community more so than a community that exists for the sake of a company.
right. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, for sure. I believe in that too. We need more communities to be
Hmm.
built authentically, and we need
Hmm.
to figure out ways to convert that into business so that it feels
Yeah,
authentic and you're not
yeah,
like not forcing anybody,
yeah,
right? So uh, I would love to see the same, like community first,
yeah.
business second, companies being built in this age. uh,
I would say community builders have the hardest part
right,
of that piece, which
right,
is the relationships,
right,
right? And they have the piece that you can't really buy because
right,
you can't buy relationships. You can't buy community, right? You could spend $100 million to start a community, but that's no guarantee that a community is actually going to form.
right, right. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Scott, this has been amazing. Scott, thank you. Appreciate you
Yeah,
for taking time and having so
yeah,
many awesome points. I love with the
yeah. Happy
community
to.
for the community. That should be
Yeah,
like a mantra for everybody. So,
yeah.
uh,
And and if you run into other people who are building communities as a business,
right.
please let me know and connect because I would connect me to them because I'd love to talk to them.
Yeah, 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 for sure, for sure. Yeah, folks who are listening, you got Scott's
Yep.
circle, so uh, you be on that. But yeah, thanks
Yeah.
everybody for tuning in as well. We have amazing guests lined up. Uh, I love talking to folks like Scott who bring new perspectives about building community and various other things. And yeah, stay tuned. More to come, more content to create and consume. Stay healthy, guys.
Awesome. Thank
Cheers.
you. All right. Thanks. All right.